So when I knew I wanted to be a cantor, I really had no idea how one becomes a cantor, but I visited cantorial schools, and it took me a couple of years to finally get up the nerve to just go and do it and apply. And the year that I applied to HUC, they had instituted a program where the first-year cantorial students had to go to Israel. And I had 2 small children, and I couldn't do that. So I still knew I was going to do it, I just didn't know how. And I went to Hunter, and I studied Hebrew, and I did everything that I could on my own. I listened to recordings, I did whatever I could do. And then I was pushing the stroller, and you know, when you push a stroller when your kids are little, you spend all day talking to babies. I was in a line at Pathmark on the Upper West Side, and there was a woman in front of me in the line, and I just was talking to her because she was an adult, and I was tired of talking to a baby. And she clearly didn't want to give me her story, but she kind of did, but I could tell she was holding something back. She said she was in a hurry, though, and she said she was going to school, and I asked her where, and she wouldn't tell me, but it was in the neighborhood. Anyway, she was going to rabbinical school, and that's what she didn't want to tell me. So, of course, I was interested. I asked her where it was, and she waited for me, and then she showed me where the school was. And it was 3 blocks from where I was living, and it was where my children went to nursery school and where I was three mornings a week anyway. I didn't know there was a rabbinical school there. So she told me the name of it. I went home, and I was way too afraid to call because I thought that the dean, Shohama Wiener, was going to be, what did I know? An old Jewish man with a long white beard. I mean, that's really just the description of my great-grandfather. But so I was for 6 months, I just sat on the phone number, didn't call. Finally, I called and found out that Shohama was, a woman, a modern woman. So we talked, and I said, if you train rabbis, why can't you train cantors? I mean, this was a long discussion, but that's basically what it was. And she said, why not? So she brought it up with the president, and Rabbi Manigold, who kept saying, oh, it's a good idea, but we're going to put it on the back burner. And that went on for about 2 years. But they did have some cantorial courses for the rabbinical students. So I took those. I went to school. It was a little one room, a teeny room that we shared with one of the minyanim that used it as an oneg room. It was tiny. And we would have to clean it up when we're finished, and they would clean it up when they finished. And then a year later, it was 2 rooms. And then, anyway, now it's a big school. But that was starting when I was there in 1988. So I went to the academy, I guess you could say as a default, because it was where I could go and not spend the first year in Israel. And JTS wasn't an option because I never considered myself to be comfortable in a conservative setting. Not knowing what the academy was, I had no idea what I was walking into, but they had me. And so we started with one class, and everybody was at a different level, and that was what was so scary. I remember the first day of school. It was surreal to me. I thought everybody spoke Hebrew. Everybody understood every word of Hebrew. It was a Haftarah trope class. And I thought I was the only one that didn't know what was going on. You know, the melodies weren't familiar. Hebrew was still kind of new to me. My study partner the first couple sessions was Joe Solomon, who had, do you know Joe? Who had an Orthodox background and really, really knew Hebrew. And that's why I thought everybody else did. And I remember needing to take a break in the middle of the day, and I decided I'd get some air and just walk around the block. And I ran into 3 other students from the school that I had met that day. Joe David and Stephen Rosenberg, who didn't graduate, he dropped out, and somebody else. And the weird thing is that they all had flaming red hair. And I'll never forget this. The sun was like shining on their red heads, and the whole day was just weird. The whole day was just, but I remember that day because I was scared. I never thought of not continuing, but I realized I was way, way out of my league. But I continued. So that was the first thing, Haftarah. And by my second year, there was one other cantorial student, and she had transferred from JTS, and she and I graduated at the same time.
And who was that?
That was Susan Alcott. And so this whole idea of pluralism, I didn't go to the academy because it was pluralistic or for any reason other than that was where I could go. And I knew from my background growing up what Reform Judaism was. My great uncle was the founder, along with his best friend, of the Reform congregation in the town that I grew up in. My parents weren't comfortable with what they said organized institutional Judaism. And so I used to go to services with my friends and my aunt and uncle. And I was really connected there. I really loved being there. And I think it was I'm sure it was because of the music. And I loved the formality of classical Reform Judaism. And that's what I knew. So at the academy, there was nothing like that. We didn't learn about that kind of music. We learned starting when Ken Cohen became the cantorial director. We learned about Nusach, we learned about cantillation, and that's when I learned what Jewish music was. I mean, that part of Jewish music, and immediately incorporated it into my teaching and to my work. I already had a cantorial job, even though I really didn't know what I was doing. I just kind of knew how to read music, I knew how to sing, and I flew by the seat of my pants and was always afraid that I was going to be found out. And I felt like that pretty much until my 5th year of cantorial school, that I was, even though I felt that I was part of the group and I really did have something to contribute, a lot to contribute, I felt that because I was probably the least traditional, with the least traditional background, or the least, I don't know, the most liberal in the school, I still felt that I was, even though I was part of the group, I was the black sheep, and somebody was going to find out one day. I think they already knew that, but I didn't know that they knew that. And so there was a class taught by Rabbis David Fass and Shohama Wiener called Personal Theology. And to me, that was one of the most important classes I ever took. Not in terms of my practical professional teaching or service leading or singing, but because that's when I realized that everybody has self-doubts in their faith. Everybody. And that was shocking to me. And it was comforting, it was reassuring, it was eye-opening. It left me open to be free to express what I wanted to express and not just keep it to myself. And it opened up the way I taught my congregation, the way I taught my private students, the way probably I sang on the bima. I could be me. I could be free. That class was the most important one to me. And I think the fact that David Fass was one of the teachers was important too, because he was so provocative and challenging that you could say anything or do anything, express yourself in any way. You were counted and you were accepted, and when he left, I really missed that. I really missed his teaching. He was great. He was great. And he and Shohama were a good foil for each other because they're very, very different. But it was a really good team to study with. So some of the people that were in school back then, Shohama was the dean, and she was made the dean, I think, when she graduated from AJR. It was a very small place. There were very few people. And it was minuscule then, so it made sense. And somebody graduates, okay, they're the dean already. So Shohama is such a, she's like an embracing, gigantic hug. She's welcoming and forgiving and peaceful. And it was, to me, it was always a very calm place to be, even though we were studying and individuals would be chaotic. It was, Shohama's presence to me was always very soothing. Yeah. And one of the, when you're in a small group and you get to know everyone so well, everybody is a character. It becomes almost like what you see on TV, almost a sitcom. But one of the people that stands out to me is Harris Goldstein, who now goes by the name of Raphael. And he was this very, very smart, very articulate, empathetic, loving, kind, really just such a great presence to study with. And I mean, he was a student. I think he graduated, if he didn't graduate the year I graduated, and I think he may have, it was the year before. And he did something that was so brave. He came out during ordination, and the administration didn't know that he was going to do that. His family didn't know. I think we knew that morning. And I think it was after that year that everyone's ordination speeches had to be checked by the dean in advance. But to me, it was very brave. I mean, he had his whole professional career on the line. Who knew that the world was just going to become more accepting and more, maybe he knew. But, and he did a lot of work with AIDS patients, I remember. He's one of the standout students. I mean, everybody was unusual, because you come to a place where everybody has a different kind of Jewish background, and everybody had something to offer. Everybody was unusual. When you get to know people like that, they are. And in those days, too, the students tended to be second and third career people. So I was the youngest student at the time. And I wasn't that young, but I mean, I had children. I had already had a career, but I was the youngest student. I think that it's different now. I think that people start right out of college, or they start right out of graduate school. I mean, it's a bigger range now, I think. I mean, there are more students, so. So I went to the academy because it was convenient and it was where I could go. I had a background in Reform Judaism. I didn't really think about what the idea of pluralism was when I first got there. I figured, well, I'll learn about the school. I just wanted to get in and get started. When I got there, I realized everybody was very different. Their backgrounds were very different from mine, and it was scary. But very soon I realized how exciting it was, that there were many more similarities than differences, and that dividing everyone between Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, Renewal, Modern Orthodox, what's the point? I think in those days, my goal was to just be tolerant in the beginning, just to be tolerant and accept, and finish. But that's really not how it was. Not only did I become tolerant and accepting, I grew to really incorporate things that I learned from all the different movements and the different people and the different backgrounds. And I use a lot of it in my teaching, in my work with congregations, with families. I don't now think of myself as a Reform Cantor educator. I'm a Jewish educator. I think the academy made me see in a much wider way. And I think if I had gone to the Reform Seminary, which is where I thought I had belonged, I would have been a Reform clergy and borrowed perhaps from other places, but I don't think that I would see it with this broad range that I see it and that I experience it now. And I think that as the movements have been growing and developing, I think the boundaries are fuzzier. I mean, you can plunk yourself in the middle of a reform or a renewal or a reconstructionist or a conservative service, and unless you had the book in your hand and you saw it, you might not, well, except for some little specifics, you might not even know where you were, what movement you were in. And I think that going forward, these boundaries are going to become even fuzzier, to the point where we're not going to have 5 or 6 movements. We're not going to have 3 movements. We're probably going to have, I don't know what they'll be called, 2. What might be just orthodox, or I don't know whatever it'll be called, and everything else. I don't know what it would be called, but I would fit in with everything else. And I'm very, very comfortable in a traditional conservative service, or in a classical reform, or in a renewal, or in a folky service. And I attribute that to the Academy, because all the students learned from each other, and the teachers were from every corner, every background. So I think that it made me not just tolerant and accepting, but incorporating all this, because I don't think I would have learned to use Nusach in the way that I do and love it so much. I certainly would never have been able to take a traditional conservative High Holy Day job and daven the whole thing. And I did that, and I could never have done that otherwise. So I think going forward, just in terms of just the Jewish institutional world, I think that the Academy is really, it's poised to be in a great place. It's not movement bound, and I really don't think that's the future of Judaism. So I think, but I do think that now, presently, the position of Cantor, which has always been pretty diverse, is even more diverse. And I think that might be for economic reasons on the part of congregations. Congregations are shrinking. Congregants are not, they're not all affiliated. They're doing private teaching, and they're not, everybody's not affiliated with a congregation the way they did before. They don't, for their different needs now. I think that for that reason, the whole role of the cantor is becoming even more diverse. It's not just the bar mitzvah teacher and the service leader, and now it's the educator. It's the, I give sermons. I fill in for the rabbi. I've been doing that for the past 10 years in my 2 congregations. I think that rabbis and cantors should all come out as kolbo. I think that the idea of studying together, which the Academy has always done, is a great idea. I think that cantors should be taught philosophy and text and everything that the rabbis are teaching. And yes, everybody has their own specialty, but I think kolbo is what everyone, I think that's what congregations are looking for. And I think that we can all become not just well-rounded, but we all have to do everything, because that's the economic reality. So, I mean, I've served as cantor educator, but I think if I were going to start now, or if students were going to ask me what should I do, I would say, don't go to cantorial school. Go to rabbinical school, or be both. So when I got to the Academy, I came in with a very strong musical background. I had a master's in vocal performance in opera, and from a leading conservatory. And I came to New York to sing opera. And I had some jobs. Every 6 weeks you would go out, and in between jobs, I sang in choirs at Temple Emmanuel and Park Avenue Synagogue. And that's when I realized that that's the kind of music I want to do. it never occurred to me that a woman could be a cantor, because even in the 80s it was kind of new, in the late 80s. And so when I came into the academy, music was a language to me the way Hebrew is the way I use it now. It was just something I could do. I could see it on the page and hear it. I could read it. I'm a correct reader. That's also how I got music jobs, because I could read on sight. And it also meant I could conduct. So when I came in, I really knew music, and when the new cantorial students came in, there was one of us, then two, then three. They came in through more of a Jewish background, through liturgy, through being in services, through the language, and that wasn't my background. My background really was through the back door, through music. And so my challenges were the liturgy, Hebrew. That was very difficult for me, because as a kid, I never went to Hebrew school. I went to a Yiddish cultural school where they weren't allowed to talk about God. And the last 2 years in middle school, there was no bar mitzvah program, but it turned into civil rights school. It was a very liberal Chicago suburban school. And it was interesting. I learned a lot about Yiddish music. I learned a lot about Jewish art, but not Hebrew. I never even knew the Aleph Bet until I was an adult, and which may be why I'm a good teacher, because I'm not a teacher by training, but just by on-the-job learning. So I think it was because I started older, as I know how to teach, I think. Who knows? But so the frustration for me in school was that all these other cantorial students didn't have the facility with music, with the just reading it and being able to conduct and read a score and hear it as you look at it on the page. And to me, that was just the way, it was like reading English. But what I work with now in my everyday professional life are all the challenges that I had in school. The Hebrew, that was a big challenge, and I overcame that, and now I feel like I can open the Bible and translate. I mean, that's huge. That's huge. So and I think all of this that I got from AJR, and that in its infancy is only more now. It's only more, and I know the cantorial students are getting much more text-oriented classes, and they're taking Midrash, and they're taking Talmud, and that's what everybody should do. And all the rabbinical students should take Nusach and cantillation. And for those who aren't as musical as the cantorial students, it doesn't matter. We're not looking for opera singers. Everybody should have a facility at almost everything and specialize in whatever. But everybody should do everything. So when I was in school, there were so few students that everybody served a purpose. Everybody did something. And one of the things I did for 1 year was I was the co-president of this Students Association with Robert Silvers. And then upon graduating, a few years later, for two terms, which I think was 4 years, although it seemed like 8 years, I was the president of ARC. And that was before ARC had a real, before it was in the process of writing bylaws. And Joe David had a huge, it was because of Joe David that we have bylaws, and that ARC really is a strong organization. And that was while I was the president, but Joe really had a lot to do with that. And my relationship to the Academy now is that in all my free time, none of us has free time, but 2 years ago, I took 3 courses at the Academy, and I learned, I think that I was in a place in my professional life and my personal life that I could really suck it all up. I could absorb it all, and I wasn't my mind wasn't in different places, and now my children are grown, and I really wanted to be there, just to be there, to take the classes, not because I had to graduate and I had to tick it off the list. And I loved those classes. I loved those classes. And I studied 2 of them with Jill Hammer. And I have to say, from what I had heard about Rabbi Hammer before, that she was very spiritual. I was really afraid to take her class. I'm not sure I was going to be able to continue. But after one day being in her class, she is so amazing and such a strong teacher that I'll teach anything she teaches. I mean, if she teaches, construction work, I would take it. She's such a fabulous teacher. And I use what I studied in her class with my congregation all the time. And when I write, I never told her this, but when I write an article or a sermon, she's always sort of in my mind, how she speaks, how she talks, what I got from her, and how it's okay to just run with it. And I want to study with her some more. I really loved studying with her. And I haven't been able to take classes this year because of my schedule, but next year I want to. And I hope that the Academy will still have some sort of a way to allow the alumni to do that without being in a program. I thought about being in rabbinical school. And I met with Ora, and we both realized I have 28 more courses before I would be able to graduate. And the idea of starting a program with 28 courses ahead of me at my age is just not something I can fathom. So, but 1 or 2 at a time, not with the idea of finishing, but just with the idea of being a better Bema present, a better teacher, a better everything. And it's just to do it because it's interesting. But I can't take 6 or 7 classes a semester anymore. I can't even imagine that. But I do want to get back.
And your prayer for the Academy in the future?
My prayer for the Academy for the future is to absolutely retain its pluralistic goal, which it does, which I understand is in its mission statement, because I think that that's the future of Judaism in general for every movement. And I think that the movements that are so specifically bound to themselves, are going to find themselves getting very small or incorporating with other movements. And in fact, cantorial courses, I understand, between HUC and JTS are, I think they're together now for, I don't know, for everything but some of it. And that makes sense. There are many more similarities than differences in all our movements. So my prayer for the Academy is to grow and to grow its library, to get its credential, its accreditation. I think that's it.